coming into this field, I would say it was fueled by my parents. They left me with one advice. They were like, whatever you choose, make sure that it's not for the money. I guess I picked the right one. I was working as a case manager in Singapore for a bit. So that was some exposure to some of the real struggles that people have at different layers. But I think at the very essential, we are all just human and we all struggle with different things. And it has brought me into clinical psychology.
Interesting advice by your parents. Usually you advise the opposite. Welcome back to Be Kind to Your Mind. Today's episode is one that will resonate many in the mental health profession, especially those who are just starting out. We often celebrate graduation as the beginning of a psychologist's career, but the reality is far more complex. For many early career psychologists, the journey starts with financial instability, an uncertain job market, and the heavy weight of self-doubt about their skills. It's a season filled with passion and hope, but also stress and insecurity that can feel overwhelming. To unpack these struggles, I'm joined by Evelyn Ngui, clinical psychologist at Sunway Medical Centre and founder of Candid Conversations, a peer support group she started to create a safe space for early career psychologists to share their experiences and challenges. If you ever wondered about what it's really like to step in the field after finishing your studies, or if you're an early career psychologist trying to find your footing, this episode is for you. So, Evelyn, welcome to the episode today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you here as well. Let's first begin with an introduction about yourself and we can take it from there.
Okay, so a little bit of a backstory. I would say coming into this field, I would say it was fueled by my parents who, when I was like choosing a university subject, I was like, what course should I go for? They left me with one advice. They were like, whatever you choose, make sure that it's not for the money. And in hindsight, I guess I picked the right one because of some of the things that we're going to share about later. So when I graduated from my bachelor's, I actually did a year in Malaysian Care, which is like an NGO, got a little bit of exposure in social work. And then I was working as a case manager in Singapore for a bit. So that was some exposure to some of the real struggles that people have at different layers. So from like the B40, then to like Singapore, working with people who struggled with gambling addiction, and then back here to work with very different population. But I think at the very essential, we are all just human and we all struggle with different things. So that was a fun journey so far, and it has brought me into clinical psychology.
Oh, that's interesting advice by your parents. Usually you advise the opposite.
Yes.
Find the one that can earn you an income.
Correct. It's a little bit to do with my family background as well, because we are all Christians and my dad was working as a pastor. So then they were like, okay, so we help the people, but we try not to put a priority on the financial compensation, which I feel in hindsight is like, it's both good advice and also some drawbacks as well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there are several common themes in this industry, especially for psychologists. One being the financial compensation of this kind of job. But I think this is something that we discuss as the discussion goes on. Mm-hmm. But I think I got to know you based on this support group, right? That it was
kind of
something of a support group.
Yes.
Related more to psychologists who are just entering into the industry. And these are events that are related more to common issues and struggles that are typically faced by people who just entered into the job market. So how did that come about, and what inspired you to actually start that?
I was doing a little bit of backtrack earlier today also, to like how Candid Conversation was born back in 2022. So I graduated in 2021. So I think within a year of graduation, right, I really felt like, is this all that is? I mean, it's great. It's great to graduate into the field, and then suddenly there are like a lot of options, a lot of opportunities. But then at the same time, I also felt like, the safety, the network, the safety support that we had throughout our training years, I was like, oh, that just disappeared. And who can we then reach out to? And then typically it will be your cohort. So you would be reaching out and talking to people that you studied with, you trained with, and you graduated with. And then I was thinking, is that all that is? Or am I the only one who was feeling that way? And then I'm speaking to a few of my graduate friends, and they also felt like, okay, it seems like when you graduate, you're sort of like on your own. But what is there? Is there any guidance or any pathway that we can then have? So then, back then I was a lot more braver, I think. So I just found some email addresses of some pioneers in the field. So I just then dropped them an email and I was like, okay, this is me. This is the struggles that I'm facing as an early career psychologist. What are some advice that you can have for me? Should I form a group? Should I do something about it? And some of them were very kind. They even offered to have a Zoom session with me, gave me very good advice, and Candid Conversations was born from that point onwards. So to bring in MSCP into the picture, MSCP, Malaysian Society for Clinical Psychology. So I saw an email that I wrote them in 2022 as well. So then I was like, okay, we are a group of early career clinical psychologists. We want to connect. We want to know what is next for us. And I actually highlighted two issues. I said, we feel like there's no support at the moment and we kind of don't know what to do. So we are eager. We want to know how we can contribute, how we can network, but we're not sure how we can go about it. And fortunately, MSCP also responded, and then we sort of like collaborated on a few events.
Right. So I think what you've highlighted would be a common lived experience for someone who goes into the field of clinical psychology, where once they have graduated, it isn't so much of like a corporate structure where someone goes into maybe marketing or HR, and then there's already an established system that maybe have spanned back 100, 200 years ago. That's how things have been done all along. Mm-hmm. And then there's already a set structure and ladder that you follow. You just follow through the steps, and likely you expect that, when you reach a certain amount of years, this is the outcome they expect. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not so much for psychology, where it's a relatively new field. And in our line of work, it's also a very individualized type of work. Mm-hmm. We are in the therapy or assessment or consultation room on our own with the client. It's not so much of working in a department as a team on a particular project or an issue.
Correct.
So these kind of differences then, I think, leads to the outcome of where people might go into the field and then feeling largely unsupported or perhaps not knowing what to do. Mm-hmm. The kind of issues that you have encountered once you've entered into the industry.
Correct. And I feel like it's such a pity as well, because we are trained to be people who connect. We connect so well with our patients, with our clients. But then to graduate and feel like, oh, okay, am I just supposed to connect with my clients and that's it? Is it just a solo pathway after this? And I feel like that was why a lot of graduates, myself included, we felt like, maybe there's something more that's beyond this. Like, how do we sort of like form webs and networks that's beyond the solo pathway, which I definitely see how it happens as well.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I think on this topic of getting into the industry, perhaps just newly graduated, or maybe this has been at the back of the minds of trainees or maybe potential students in clinical psychology. What should one expect once they have graduated and entering into the job market? What is the experience that you think a new graduate might encounter?
Correct. So if we look at the landscape of a graduate of clinical psychology at this moment, what they are probably facing is there's a lot of demand for jobs, but not a lot of supply at the moment. Even when I look back on like my experience, so when I graduated in 2021, it was very unique because there were some things that were going on at the same time. So 2021 was also around the period. I think I was at the first wave of a lot of graduates of clinical psychology coming into graduating and going into the field, because very soon after that, a lot more programs open up, a lot more graduates, a lot more intakes and students that they took in. So that was one thing that was happening. I think secondly, also the Malaysian Allied Health Professions Act also came into play. So we all had to be registered. We all had to make sure that our credentialing was up to date. And also MSCP, there were also some changes going on. As the authority in clinical psychology, how do they then partner with MAHPC, the Allied Professions Act? How do they then sort of like find the identity, right? So I think graduating at that time, it was a lot of question mark. Oh, okay, should I look at the Allied Health Professions Act? Should I look at MSCP? Should I be looking at what my seniors are doing? But it seemed like when they graduate, the landscape was so different from how I experienced. What I found fortunate was because I graduated at that point, finding employment was not that hard. I would assume that if you graduate now, it would be much harder to find a full-time job at a location or like at a place where they had a lot of facilities and also like resources or support. So I can imagine that it would be interesting in the sense that a lot of more graduates then consider different opportunities that come up. And it can also be very daunting at the same time, because it's like, okay, then what do? I spend so much money on my education, then my parents are waiting for the ROI. Then how do I actually join the professional field? How do I go into this career that looks so prestigious, but then how do I survive at the same time?
Yeah, so I think this is an important conversation to have, because I graduated sometime before you. And at that time, there were only 2 universities that offer these programs. Mm-hmm. 1 intake per year, 10 students per intake. So you're looking at 20 graduates each year. And that was how the landscape was like for quite a long time. Although jobs were not plentiful at the time, but most definitely with the number of programs that are churning on graduates at this time, things have changed. Mm-hmm. For context also, I've just started another practice about maybe 1 year plus ago, and just noticing the demand based on a practice that I started 10 years back, and a practice that I started probably about 5 years back, mm-hmm. and a practice that started 1 year back. The development and the sort of engagement that we have in terms of client demand is actually very much different, mm-hmm. and I think it's reflective also of the landscape at this time. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is completely right. There are many more graduates at this time, many more programs. I would say in multiples of a few 100% more graduates each year. Mm-hmm. Definitely, I think it has a shift in terms of the supply and demand, especially in the context of what is the actual demand of clients, and then that translates into actual job supply, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think that graduates at this time are facing a much more challenging landscape as compared to perhaps graduates in the past. Mm. Even if you look back just 3 years, 5 years, maybe within a time frame of 5 years ago, things look very different right now. Mm-hmm. And if you were to think about the events that you've done in Candid Conversations, what are the common sort of themes that emerge from those conversations that you have with all these early career psychologists?
So I would say we've had many conversations about this. I think during 1 or 2 of the events that you joined, we also had like some qualitative conversations in terms of what is going on in the field right now and what would be some of the common resources that might be helpful. What actually I eventually realized was that it wasn't as simple as asking for more pay, or like asking for like, okay, if I get a good supervisor, then my career is sort of like set. This is it. I'll be good to go. But eventually I realized that it wasn't just at the individual level, but it was more like at a systemic level. I think with the help of having conversations such as this with different seniors, with juniors, with pioneers of the field, it sort of helps you see the the history of clinical psychology in Malaysia, it sort of helps you see the perception as well as to maybe prior to MCO, even prior to COVID-19, no one would actually consider mental health to be something that you can just easily bring up and have a good conversation about it. After the COVID-19 pandemic, then we started seeing much more conversation, much more awareness, and the whole idea about like, oh, let's overcome the stigma about it. But it's not as simple as that. So a lot of times you have to look beyond what is currently available, what you're currently seeing. For example, like is there a system to even support more clinical psychologists, opening practices, asking for certain amount of like fee structure from the clients and patients they see, when in reality, a lot of these probably come from like the B40 population. They might not be able to sustain weekly sessions with a clinical psychologist at what they can sustain with the difficulties that they are facing. So then that sort of like opened my eyes to see that this wasn't an issue with like, oh, it's not about one or two individuals not wanting to give you the salary that you deserve. It could be at a systemic level. We don't have a sustainable environment to sort of keep it going. That's one. And also, I think the difficulty could also come from some misrepresentation of what a clinical psychology career could look like. It brings to mind a recent newspaper article where it was shared that if you're in the private field, you can probably earn 10K per month with just a few years of experience. So misconceptions like such as this then pull people into thinking like, oh, I want to get a degree in psychology. Okay, then the next step is as long as I get into a master's program and I graduate, then that's it. I have my career set out for me. So there's so many misconceptions. There's so many things that you sort of have to like open your eye to sort of see at a deeper level.
Yeah. So I think you're right in which there's a few sort of perhaps factors at play here. And I think as an overall, our kind of service is it's very cumbersome, right? So it takes quite an amount of training. And then to administer the service, it takes quite a long time. So you meet someone for a session and dispense over multiple sessions in order to achieve some kind of positive therapeutic outcome. And all this then incurs cost on the part of the provider. And the cost then comes in terms of fees to the person receiving it. And even though you might look at the mental health needs as being very high, but at the same time, as what you mentioned, certain segments of the population might not actually afford such services due to the overall, I think, inefficient and cumbersome way in which how this particular service actually works. If you require someone to pay hundreds or even thousands in order to actually receive the services, how many people can actually afford that? That's, I think, one factor. And in the other factor is really that in terms of the demand and supply, we're looking at two separate markets here. You have the supply and demand in terms of clients who are actually willing to pay out of pocket in order to receive services. So then the supply would be the psychologists. How many psychologists does it require to actually fulfill the demand of people who are willing to pay for the services? But alternatively, in the education sector, that is actually a different market altogether. You have psychology graduates or students in psychology who aspire to be psychologists. And I think among the different specializations or postgraduate options in psychology, clinical psychology is one of the highly sought after fields.
Yes, for sure.
And worldwide, it is known as a field that's very difficult to get into. So I think in terms of competing for prestige or status, or even like, in terms of desirability of, when I'm a psychologist, this is what I can earn. The perception is that I should go into clinical psychology. But due to this then, in the private education market, the logic here is that there's so many students here now who wants to do clinical psychology. Why not we provide a demand for that? It just obviously makes sense in terms of, providing the education opportunities for these students and then earning an income from that. But then what happens to them when they graduate, I think that's a separate matter altogether lah. So I think all these factors in combination then creates what we have now, especially in the more recent years, where I think the number of universities that are offering these programs have, multiplied many times over. The number of students per intake have also multiplied many times over. So the initial assumption someone may have when they first started out as a psychology student, prior to that, you need 3 years in undergraduate studies or 4 years, and then another 2 years in postgraduate studies. By the time you're done, the impression that you had when you first started out, and by the time you're done, the reality of what you're facing is completely different. Right now, you are in an industry that at this time looks like it's reaching saturation. So now I think the obvious question here is that now that we have reached this point in terms of how the psychology industry is like, does this actually set up psychologists to face with financial uncertainty or perhaps financial struggles once they enter into the job market?
I think the only answer to that is yes, for sure. Because again, it's a pattern that you see, right? Because there's so much supply of graduates in clinical psychology. You have all these fresh clinical psychologists graduating and looking for full-time employment, because that would ideally be the best grounds to grow under supervision with the necessary resources that you probably cannot afford to buy yourself in the first place. So when you look into this situation, it means that there's probably going to be X number of people trying to get one job. And what this looks like for employers is then, it seems like there's so much supply, right? So are you okay with like maybe this amount of salary, and don't bother trying to negotiate, because if you don't want this job, I have other people who's very happily going to like take over this position anyways. So in a way, it sort of puts the applicant at the disadvantage because so much supply, right? So who are you to say no? So I've spoken to multiple graduates, multiple clinical psychologists in their early years who sort of felt like, but if I don't take this job, then what other options do I have? And it's kind of hard to negotiate as well, because like, then this becomes the going rate. Everybody is like, then it would be like, everybody is okay with this kind of like compensation. Who am I to sort of like say no? And maybe certain graduates, when I speak to them, they would be like, yeah, this kind of arrangement is good for me. And I would then be the one who would be like, are you sure you're happy with this kind of like compensation? Especially when there are a lot of commitments that's going on. So assuming that you do the 6 years of like education, and when you graduate, you're already in like, I would say your late 20s. And this is also around the time that you're like looking into settling down, looking into making like very serious purchases, like you want to buy a house, you want to get like a car, you want to settle down, you want to have a family. And is this really ideal? Because we are sort of talking about the salary range, which maybe a degree holder in a corporate role could easily get. And you're a master's holder. So then it doesn't make sense at all. The sad thing is that people either end up, what they do is they take multiple jobs, meaning like, I'm working in this full-time role, but I'm also doing an associate on the side. I'm also lecturing on the side, and also doing like maybe like assisting in some research on the side. And all this is just to like pad your wallet and sort of like make sure you have something in the bank. So they either do that or they just leave the field, and they would straight up say it doesn't seem to be worth it to stay, to work, to serve others wholeheartedly, even though I'm feeling very down when I cannot sort of like earn enough to, I would say you can earn enough to survive, but you can't earn enough to flourish.
So I think the overall theme here is that basically being more qualified, or looking at a field that perhaps some years back used to be perceived as a kind of job that might be, perhaps harder to get in, or perhaps portray a kind of prestige or status does not actually guarantee that right now. In fact, circumstances might be completely different or very different at this time. Now, I think we've spoken about the financial aspect of things and sort of how supply and demand actually plays into that. But I think there's also the other aspect of going into the field as a new psychologist. In terms of a person's overall skill set on whether they are ready, when you think about someone going into the field as an early career psychologist, knowing also that during our training, there's a variety of different skills that we need to develop over supervision. And now that they're out in the field, they're supposed to be independent, that layer of protection is no longer there. What are the common fears that new graduates might have going into their first job?
This is a very good question because I can recall even when I started my first job, I was hired as the first psychologist as well in a center that worked primarily with children. And it was both exciting in a sense because of like, oh, what are the opportunities there? What are some of the things that you could like create from scratch, right? And it's sort of like a fun challenge in a way. But then came the reality of like, I don't think that we were sort of like briefed in terms of how do you then do case management, maybe in a multidisciplinary way. How do you then learn how to balance the revenue versus like the cost of whatever department or team that you're starting? How do you ensure that, you know, the clients that come in with whatever limited resources that you have as a blossoming department? All these questions suddenly came into mind. And then I just found myself feeling like, whoa, so I guess I don't feel very prepared after all. In my conversations with some of the pioneers or some of the seniors, then came the question of like, oh, perhaps clinical psychologists, we're taught to do intervention, we're taught to do assessment, but we're not taught how to manage people or manage teams. We're not taught how to learn how to manage a department or like a team from both the clinical sense and both the operation point of view. And all these are things that you then have to pick up on your own. So it then becomes not just like, oh, I still need to brush up on a lot of my clinical skills. Obviously, I have to learn theoretical wise. And then it becomes also, I have to learn how to like balance certain things on the budget. I have to learn how to make sure that certain resources are in or not. I have to make sure that I learn how to operate like a department on my own. So there was a lot more questions, I would say, than answers at that point that you then have to delve into it. And without that support or without that community, it's kind of hard to overcome these challenges by yourself.
I think what you have described would be the sort of being underskilled in other areas of what it requires to function on a more independent basis. As a psychologist, we are specifically trained in very specific skills, providing psychological intervention, providing psychological assessments. Actually, it's two key skills that we are trained in. Understandable also because the training period for a master's program is 2 years full-time. There's only so much that you can include in that 2 years. And I would say it's already highly rigorous to undergo that 2 years. A lot of students actually burn out from that process. But at the same time, in order for someone to function, let's say in a capacity where they have to manage cases outside of the therapy session, not just providing the intervention, then it becomes challenging because the individual likely has not done so before. Whether it's anything operational related, anything that's management related in managing people, or even in the context of managing highly challenging cases. This is still very specific to actual service that we provide. All these likely are out of the area of competence for someone just starting out in a career. And it's a skill that unfortunately is not something that is emphasized on in the context of a training of a psychologist. And in your experience, I think for anyone going into the field, sometimes these things are expected of you and then you just have to go with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you have to learn how to like roll with that. And I think certain interesting questions come to light then because sometimes there would be certain gray areas as well. How do I help my employer maximize the ROI or maximize revenue, while at the same time wanting to ensure that the clients actually receive the best care that you can have? And what if the best care that you consider is something that is very expensive from the point of your employer, and learning to balance that? So all these are really interesting questions that you eventually learn to like how do you sort of navigate that with help, of course. I've had questions such as like, my employer is actually asking me to be in charge of the marketing as well. Should I do this? Or my employer actually wanted to start a new center and put me in charge of all the furnishing or making sure that the renovations are done right. Is this actually part of my job scope? And all these interesting questions then come about with no specific answer, a best way, or like how do you sort of maintain that ethical standards while sort of securing your job at the same time?
That's possibly also the consequence of this industry being a relatively young, I would say a very young industry in Malaysia and perhaps for most parts of the world as well. In an established system, you will likely have, like I go in as a HR exec. I know exactly what a HR exec is supposed to do, and what is outside of the scope of what a HR exec is supposed to do. And when I promote into a senior exec, HR executive, senior executive, then there's a job scope that comes with it. Yeah. So all these are already deeply established into the system already. Not so much in the field of psychology, where even for the pioneers or someone who is more mid-career or late career, a lot of things that they do are also likely going to be their first time or something that's relatively new to them. Because just like what we've discussed, in their own training program, when they first graduate, they were also not exposed to all these different skills that they were supposed to apply in order to function in their role.
And I realized that actually in the course of asking questions in 2022, late 2021, a lot of times the answers that I actually got was like, you're not the first one to go through this. We as your seniors, we've also gone through this in our past. We've also had to advocate for a lot of things. We've also had to learn a lot of things on the ground. Which then brings me to my second question. If you've already done this, how come there's no guidelines out and about? How do we actually go about this? So I think there is a lot of frustration, yes, but also a lot of realization and comfort also, I guess, in knowing that you're not the first one to go through certain drawbacks or challenges.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I think it's just like a wheel that just keeps turning. It's a repetitive cycle that's been happening. It's not necessarily something that's unique just to the new graduates at this time, but perhaps to graduates of the past as well. But I think so far from our discussion, the unique challenge that's being faced by new graduates at this time is really the overall supply of the graduates into the market.
The current landscape, yes.
Yeah. So that definitely, I think, without a doubt, that has changed drastically, especially so in the past 5 years. Now, aside from a skill set perspective, I'd like to also speak about the role being one that is quite individualized. As mentioned earlier, it's a service that we provide in person in the room. It's not like a team-based effort where everyone is meeting the same client. Psychologists, it can be multidisciplinary. And as such, then it can be one journey that can feel quite isolating or can feel quite lonely. Now, my question to you is that how had you coped going into this job early on, given that there isn't so much of support, or that it can be something that's, perhaps a very individualized kind of a role?
Definitely, it was one thing that I sort of knew early on. So I thought that I was ready for it, right? Because in my case, I was a little bit different in the sense that I had a job waiting for me once I graduated. So I sort of like had the sense that, okay, this is how my job is going to be like, and likely I would be the only clinical psychologist there, and this would be how I would need to work. But knowing that and actually being in that situation is very, very different. So even if you know, like, yeah, I mean, clinical psychologists, you probably wouldn't have the resources to sustain a whole team within like one center or within like one working location. So then when you move into it, then you realize that who's going to answer all these questions that I have? Who's going to like, you then, there's value, right, in having someone from, someone who's very like-minded, who can then, you can throw out certain questions, you can brainstorm together. And that was something that I didn't have. And I think a lot of graduates as well, we don't have that when you graduate or when you're sort of like the sole clinical psychologist that's hired. So Candid Conversations came about at that time when I started having discussions with friends, discussions with people, and then trying to reach out to different resources. So if there are no ready-made resources, how do we then ensure that we can assess something, anything at all, to be able to sustain as early careers at that point, right? So reaching out to different people, sort of getting some advice, sort of creating spaces to sort of communicate beyond your cohort. I think that was something that was very, very valuable at that point.
Yeah, so the first sort of contact in terms of a support network will be your peers in your class. Mm-hmm. And I think that's quite true even for people from, back then. Mm-hmm. I'm still in touch with my classmates, and generally it's because we've went through that 2 years together, almost daily meeting one another. But beyond that, there's really a lack of support. And you had more actively, I think, created that kind of network or support in order to perhaps receive something that is not readily available out there. And over time, I think I've also received much value in terms of being much more active and participating in the community. MSCP events, for example. I've joined a couple of your events.
Yeah.
And that's purely intentional because that's just how the industry is like. We are just all on our own. And it can be a very isolating experience. Mm-hmm. And I think especially more so for early career psychologists when they first get into the field.
Yeah.
Thinking like among my friends, who might be in different roles in finance or, in a more corporate setting, it seems that they're having quite a ball of a time with their colleagues. What's happening to me right now. I think they are in for a world of isolation and loneliness unless, for example, they were to be more actively involved in order to reach out and to achieve that kind of support.
Correct. So I think based on what you shared, there is a certain decision that you have to make at one point of time. Do you want to stay within that bubble of excision, right? Like, you're probably doing okay. It's not that you're lacking anything, but to be within that bubble, it also means that maybe there are a lot of things going on that you might not be aware about. Maybe there could be certain value in it for you. And stepping out, it also requires some courage because I feel that as a fresh graduate, when you're so uncertain about a lot of the things that you do, maybe you kind of don't want to be under the scrutiny of certain seniors or people who are more established, and they'll be like, I think you're doing something that's not right, or I think this is wrong. And I can see why someone would want to stay within that bubble. I think I'm doing okay. Please give me some space so that I don't have to deal with all this scrutiny as well. And I feel like that is well that's understandable. That is one factor, but it's also a bit of a waste and a bit of a loss as well.
So as much as there can be actual scrutiny that the person might go through, but your recommendation is that perhaps it's a necessary step in order
For sure. Right. I'm always an advocate for like connection over isolation.
Well, speaking of this, I think as we are reaching towards the end of our segment, If you do consider our discussion so far with how, perhaps on a systemic level, how things are playing out due to the changes in supply, demand, and the overall landscape, and some of the difficulties faced by early career psychologists in terms of perhaps getting meaningful pay, getting a job, getting the kind of support that people from other industries would typically get. What do you think needs to happen in this industry? Or, in an ideal environment, then what do you think are some changes that you think has to happen so that our industry could do better, to thrive?
I really like this question. The ideal situation, right? No ceiling, right? I would say that maybe approach this as a little bit more structurally. I love structure. So when you hear about how other industries are doing well, it's always industries that already have the structures in place, right? That people can learn from the history. People can learn from the pathways that were taken and sort of like decide what would be the best for me in that time. And I think maybe we also need to approach this as if we were a very successful organization, meaning like, what do we do with newbies when they first graduate? We put them in an orientation program, right? We let them know that, okay, this is where you meet people. This is where you can get help. This is where you can contribute. These are your roles. You get like an employee handbook that details very clearly, okay, you do this, you don't do this, you don't do this, you do this. Stay within this circle. You're fine. You're safe here. Perhaps you get paired with like a buddy, right? That will bring you out for lunch or make sure that you're doing okay. Perhaps there could be groups that you can join, like specific interest groups. Then after that, you can stay informed of what's going on. You can network, but it's all while you're doing something that you all relatively enjoy. So I'm thinking from this point of view as for what are some of the things that we could do. I understand that there are a lot of limitations at this point, but I think ideally, that would be something that I foresee and would want for clinical psychology graduates joining our field.
So sort of a clearer guideline as to what to expect and perhaps an established system as to how they could participate to get what they need in terms of whether it's the support or the knowledge. That's what you think can be helpful.
Correct. And I had like a moment of like a brilliant idea where I was like, what about a retreat for clinical psychologists? We have so many retreats that we do for other people. We support their mental well-being. What about for ourselves? What about curating like a 3 days, 2 nights kind of like retreat where we sort of like huddle, we sort of like cry together, we sort of like learn from each other? That would be so great, actually.
Yeah, you give me a good idea. Maybe, it's with an element of profit there, it might motivate someone. I could do this. The cost is 500, and then I might top up 100 or 200 just for me to organize.
Yes, I hope to see that happen.
Definitely, I think there's a variety of different needs at this time which are unfulfilled, especially on the part of the service provider, because largely it's unsupported, and I think MSCP is trying really hard in order to provide that kind of support in terms of education, in terms of networking, and I think with Candid Conversations as well. The intentions are always well-meaning in order to provide the kind of support that otherwise will not be there. There's certain, perhaps, more policy level issues in certain, perhaps, countries. Perhaps it's more developed in terms of the authority that we have and the legal mandates that we have. That overall then creates a more healthy environment. But I think in Malaysia, we are doing quite well, especially, in the past 5 to 10 years or so, we have made quite a lot of progress in terms of making our industry much more legitimized. So I think we've come a long way, but most definitely with some of the issues that we have highlighted today, there's still a long way to go. Now, I think to cut our, end our episode today, perhaps we could end with a question about an advice that you will give to someone who is contemplating going into psychology because I want to become a clinical psychologist, or maybe a trainee in clinical psychology who's already worried about what might be coming next, knowing that these are some of the issues that they will encounter. How can I look for a job? How can I sustain an income? Or maybe someone who just started 1-2 years in. What kind of advice do you think you might give them as they begin to move forward in this journey?
I would want to give them a message of hope, actually, because graduating in this field is very exciting. It is like, oh, the world is your oyster. You have graduated. Here's your free pass. In a way, free pass. What are some of the options that you can then have? I would want them to graduate into a field where they can actually choose which pathway they want. Maybe that may not exist currently, it may not exist for the next few years, but who knows what's to come in the future, right? And I guess I would encourage them by saying that this is what we are facing now, and it's actually positive change, because then we are talking about it, people are being more aware about it, and that means that there would be further opportunities that would come eventually. It just means that we need to wait for like the demand to also rise as our supply has risen. So a lot of like stories and current happenings in our field comes to mind in terms of like how we sort of balance that. And I see progress in these areas. And these are all signs that what is to come will be even better. While it may feel quite sad at this moment, it may feel like, oh, okay, there's a lot more challenges, but we all face those challenges. Importantly, face it in a group. Don't face it alone.
Yeah, so having that sharing of lived experience among peers, I think that really provides that kind of support. And personally for me, I think I've enjoyed that kind of support as well. Probably something that early career or someone who is actually worried about these issues to really consider reaching out and be supported as we go through this journey together.
Yes, precisely.
So I think that comes to the end of our time today, Evelyn. Thank you for coming here. And I think what we discussed is going to be really beneficial to those listening back home.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Be Kind to Your Mind. Found this content educational? Hit the subscribe button to be updated on new episodes every month. See you soon.